The throne room of Pyraxis Prime gleamed with firelight that danced across walls of black crystal. Queen Velrissa sat motionless on her throne, her obsidian scales catching the light like polished stone. Her golden eyes, bright as molten metal, stared through the tall windows toward the royal gardens below. She was not watching her advisors or the court nobles who whispered among themselves. She was watching her son. Prince Kairoth sat alone beside the fountain in the garden. His small form, covered in scales that shimmered between gray and silver, seemed even smaller in the vast, open space. Other young draconians flew overhead, their wings creating shadows as they chased each other through the air. They breathed practice flames that lit up the sky in reds and oranges. Their roars echoed off the palace walls, each trying to be louder than the last. None of them landed near Kairoth. None of them called his name. Velrissa's claws tightened on the armrests of her throne. Her son had not spoken a single word since his hatching day 5 cycles ago. In human years, he would be 8 years old. He had never produced even the smallest flame. The court physicians had examined him countless times. They found nothing physically wrong, yet the results remained the same. Silence. No fire. No roar. In draconian society, these were not just abilities, they were identity. A draconian who could not roar was invisible. A prince who could not breathe fire was considered cursed. The whispers had grown louder each passing season. Some nobles had begun to suggest that perhaps young Kairoth was not fit to rule. Perhaps the throne needed a different heir. The queen had silenced such talk with her fury, but she could not silence her own fears. She had lost her mate to war 3 years ago. Kairoth was all she had left. She would tear apart anyone who threatened him, yet she could not fight the truth that lived in his silence. The heavy doors of the throne room opened with a grinding sound. General Thoraxis entered, his red scales blazing bright even in the dim hall. Behind him marched a line of guards, and between them stumbled a group of humans. Prisoners from the recent raid on the colony ship that had drifted too close to draconian space. Your Majesty, Thoraxis bowed his massive head. The human captives. As you commanded. They will be processed for service assignments. Velrissa barely glanced at them. Humans were nothing new. The Empire had encountered them several times over the past century. A young species, barely past their own planet's orbit, when the Draconians had already conquered 12 systems. They were weak, small, with no natural weapons. They served well enough as laborers and servants. Process them, she said, her voice carrying the natural reverb of Draconian speech. Send the strong ones to the mines, the educated ones to the archives, the rest to general service. As the guards began separating the humans, one of them caught Velrissa's attention. A human boy, smaller than the others, with dark hair and bright eyes, while the other humans kept their heads down, their shoulders shaking with fear or grief. This boy was looking around the throne room with an expression that seemed almost like wonder. He stared at the crystal pillars, at the flames dancing in the braziers, at the draconian guards, with their gleaming scales and sharp claws. When his eyes met the queen's, he did not look away in terror. He simply stared back with curiosity. General Thoraxis noticed and stepped forward, raising his clawed hand as if to strike the boy for his disrespect. No, Velrissa said quietly. Thoraxis froze. He is a child. Send him to garden maintenance. Keep him away from important areas. The general bowed again, though his expression showed disapproval. The humans were led away. Velrissa returned her attention to the window, to her son, who still sat alone by the fountain. 3 days passed before Jiho, the human boy, first encountered Prince Kairoth. He had been given simple brown clothing that marked him as a servant of the lowest rank. An older human named Taemin had been assigned to show him the work. Taemin was 16, tall for a human, with tired eyes that had seen too much loss too quickly. Keep your head down, Taemin whispered, as they walked through the palace gardens with cleaning tools. Don't make eye contact with any draconians. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't touch anything that looks important. Just work and stay invisible. Jiho nodded, but his eyes kept wandering to the beautiful gardens around them. Crystal flowers grew alongside real ones, their petals chiming softly in the breeze. Water flowed from fountains carved to look like ancient dragons. The sky above was a deep purple, with 3 moons visible even during the day. It's beautiful, Jiho said softly. It's a prison, Taemin replied. Don't forget that. Our people are dead or scattered. We're slaves here. Before Jiho could respond, he noticed a figure sitting by the nearest fountain. A young draconian, much smaller than the adults. With scales that looked like polished silver, the young dragon was trailing one claw through the water, watching the ripples spread across the surface. His expression seemed sad. Above them, a group of young draconians flew past, their wings beating loud against the air. One of them called down something in the draconian language. The others laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. They breathed small jets of flame at each other, showing off. Not one of them landed to greet the young dragon by the fountain. They flew on, their laughter fading. The young dragon's shoulders slumped even more. He continued drawing patterns in the water. Alone, Jiho felt something familiar twist in his chest. He knew that posture. He knew that kind of loneliness. Before the attack on his ship, he had been different too curious, too eager to explore, too likely to ask questions that made adults uncomfortable. He had spent many recesses sitting alone, while other children played together. That's the prince, Taemin hissed, grabbing Jiho's arm. Prince Kairoth. Don't look at him. Don't bother him. Royal family is absolutely off limits. But Jiho had already moved closer. Taemin cursed under his breath but did not follow. Getting caught near the prince could mean punishment, even death. Jiho stopped a few feet away from the fountain. The young prince looked up, his golden eyes wide with surprise. They stared at each other for a long moment. Up close, Jiho could see that Kairoth was probably close to his own age, maybe a little younger. The prince's eyes held the same loneliness Jiho had felt so many times before. Slowly, Jiho bent down and picked up a smooth stone from the edge of the fountain. He turned it over in his hands, then flicked his wrist, sending the stone skipping across the water surface. It bounced once, twice, 3 times before sinking. Prince Kairoth's eyes widened even more. He looked at the water where the stone had skipped, then at Jiho, then back at the water. Jiho picked up another stone and held it out. The prince hesitated, then, slowly, reached forward. His claws were small and carefully controlled. As he took the stone, Jiho showed him with gestures how to hold it, how to angle his hand, how to throw. The prince's first attempt sent the stone straight down into the water with a plop. Jiho smiled and shook his head. He found another stone and demonstrated again, exaggerating the wrist flick. The prince watched carefully, his head tilted in concentration. His second attempt was better. The stone skipped once before sinking. Something changed in the prince's expression. Not quite a smile, but something lighter than the sadness that had been there before. They spent the next several minutes throwing stones together. Jiho kept expecting guards to rush over and drag him away, but none came. The prince seemed to relax, his movements becoming less stiff. When Jiho made a particularly bad throw that sent the stone flying backward instead of forward, the prince's mouth opened slightly as if surprised. It was almost like the beginning of a laugh, though no sound came out. From high in her tower, Queen Velrissa watched through the window. She had been reviewing military reports when movement in the garden caught her eye. Now, she stood motionless, the reports forgotten, as she watched a small human boy teach her son to skip stones. Kairoth was engaged, focused. Something that resembled happiness flickered across his features. The human boy treated him like any other child, not like a broken prince or a disappointment to the empire. The queen's expression remained unreadable. but her claws slowly relaxed against the stone of the windowsill, where they had been digging grooves. In the garden below, Jiho showed Prince Kairoth one more throw, this time making an exaggerated silly face as he released the stone. The stone skipped 5 times. Jiho pumped his fist in victory, then looked at the prince with a grin. For the first time in years, Prince Kairoth's mouth curved upward at the edges. Not quite a smile, but close. Very close. Everything was about to change. Weeks passed like water flowing through the palace fountains. Every morning, Jiho was assigned to work in the gardens, and every morning, Prince Kairoth appeared by the fountain. At first, Taemin warned Jiho constantly that this would end badly. Guards would notice. The queen would be angry. But the guards did notice, and they did nothing. It seemed someone had given silent permission. The other human captives whispered about it during their evening meals in the servants' quarters. A 12-year-old boy had somehow befriended a prince. It made no sense. Draconians did not befriend humans any more than humans befriended insects. Yet day after day, Jiho and Kairoth sat together by the fountain. And day after day, the friendship grew. Jiho taught the prince human games that needed no words. They played a simple version of tag, chasing each other around the garden paths. They built small towers from smooth stones, seeing who could stack them highest before they fell. Jiho drew pictures in the dirt with a stick, and Kairoth would study them carefully before adding his own details with the tip of his claw. The prince could not speak, but he learned to communicate in other ways. He pointed. He used his whole body to express meaning. When he wanted to show Jiho something, he would tug gently at the boy's sleeve with careful claws. When he found something funny, his eyes would brighten, and his mouth would open in that almost smile that came closer to being real each day. HFY, a human woman in her 30s who worked as a medical servant in the palace, sometimes watched from a distance. She had been a xenobiologist before the capture, someone who studied alien life forms. She found the growing friendship between the boy and the prince fascinating. More than that, she found it scientifically significant. One morning, she approached Queen Velrissa in the medical wing. This was dangerous. Humans did not approach the queen without being summoned, but HFY had seen something important, and her scientific training overcame her fear. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing low. "I apologize for my boldness. I wish to speak about Prince Kairoth." Velrissa had been reviewing reports about a border dispute with another system. She looked up, her golden eyes focusing on the human woman with an intensity that made HFY's courage waver. "You are the human scientist," the queen said. It was not a question. "You worked in the medical wing yesterday, when we brought in the injured soldiers." "Yes, Your Majesty. I have studied many species. I have observed your son with the human boy Jiho." HFY took a breath. "I do not believe the prince is broken or cursed. I believe his mind works differently. My people have experience with this. We call it neurodivergence. It does not mean less. It means different." The queen's scales rippled, a sign of emotion that Draconians usually controlled better. "Explain." "The prince processes the world through different pathways than typical Draconians. Forcing him to communicate only through roaring and flame is like forcing a bird to swim or a fish to fly. He needs other methods. The human boy has accidentally provided those methods. Gestures, expressions, written symbols, visual communication." Velrissa stood from her desk, her full height making HFY step back instinctively. But the queen did not strike. She walked to the window that overlooked the gardens. Below, Jiho was teaching Kairoth some kind of game that involved jumping and strange arm movements. The prince was following along, his movements becoming less awkward with each repetition. "Your people accept these differences?" the queen asked. "We try to. We do not always succeed, but we try. We have learned that different minds bring different strengths. What seems like weakness from one view may be strength from another." 140s. The queen was silent for a long time. Then, she spoke without turning around. You may continue your observations. Report to me directly if you learn anything significant, and send more humans who understand these concepts. I want my son to have the best chance at finding his voice, even if it is not the voice our traditions expect. 1. HFY bowed deeply, then hurried away before the queen could change her mind. In the garden, Jiho had moved on to a new game. He was making exaggerated facial expressions, crossing his eyes, puffing out his cheeks, wiggling his eyebrows. Kairoth watched with intense focus, then tried to copy each one. His dragon features could not mimic all human expressions exactly, but he tried. When Jiho stuck out his tongue and made a ridiculous noise, Kairoth attempted the same, and then it happened. A sound emerged from Prince Kairoth's throat. Not a roar, not words, but a laugh. High and bright and completely genuine. It burst out of him like water breaking through a dam. The prince looked shocked at his own sound. His clawed hand coming up to touch his throat. Jiho's face split into a huge grin. You laughed! Kairoth, you laughed! The prince's eyes were wide, but then that almost smile became a real smile. And another laugh bubbled up, quieter this time, but real. From her tower window, Queen Velrissa heard the sound carried on the wind. Her hand pressed against the glass, and something that might have been tears gathered in her golden eyes. She had not heard her son make any sound in 5 years. Now, he was laughing. Because of a human child. But not everyone was pleased. General Thoraxis had also heard the laugh. He stood in the corridor below the queen's tower, his red scales seeming to darken with anger. He turned to the noble draconians standing near him. This is corruption, he growled. The human teaches our prince to be weak. Laughter is not the voice of a leader. It is the voice of a fool. The queen allows this, because grief has clouded her judgment. One of the nobles, a silver-scaled female named Ceres, nodded. The prince should be learning to breathe fire and command respect through his roar. Instead, he plays games with a slave. This will make him unfit to rule. More than unfit, Thoraxis said quietly. If this continues, we will need to invoke the old laws. A prince who cannot demonstrate traditional strength can be challenged, can be replaced. The nobles exchanged glances. Such talk was dangerous, even treasonous. But none of them disagreed. Over the following days, Jiho noticed that Kairoth was changing. The prince was still silent most of the time, but he had begun to use his hands to communicate in more complex ways. Jiho did not know much about sign language, but he knew the basics from a deaf friend he had back home. He taught these basics to Kairoth, and the prince absorbed them like dry ground soaking up rain. Kairoth began to sign simple words. Hello. Thank you. Friend. Happy. Each new word was a victory. Each successful communication made both boy and prince smile. Taemin continued to worry. He had found work in the palace archives, sorting old records and documents. There, he had access to information about draconian culture and law. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Jiho, he said one evening when they were alone in the servants' quarters. You need to be careful. I have been reading about draconian succession laws. If nobles decide a prince is unfit, they can call for something called the trial of fire. It is a test. If the prince fails, he loses his right to be heir. Jiho frowned. But Kairoth is getting better. He is learning to communicate. He is happier. That is not what draconians value, Taemin said urgently. They value strength, fire, loud roars, dominance. You are teaching him human ways, and some draconians think that makes him weaker, not stronger. That is stupid, Jiho said, his voice rising. Being able to communicate in different ways is not weak. Being happy is not weak. Kairoth is smart and kind, and he works hard at everything I teach him. I know, Taemin said, putting a hand on the younger boy's shoulder. But we are not the ones who decide. The nobles are. and many of them do not like what they are seeing. Jiho looked down at his hands. Should I stop? Should I stay away from him? Taemin sighed. I do not know. If you stay close, you might help him become strong in new ways. But you also might make him a target. Either way, there is danger. That night, Jiho could not sleep. He thought about Prince Kairoth, sitting alone by the fountain before they became friends. He thought about how the prince's eyes had been empty then. But now, they were bright with life. He thought about that first laugh, and how it had sounded like hope. No, he would not abandon his friend. Not for safety, not for anything. The next morning in the garden, Kairoth appeared with something in his claws. He handed it to Jiho carefully. It was a piece of smooth crystal carved into the shape of a bird. The craftsmanship was beautiful, detailed, and delicate. Jiho looked up at the prince in wonder. You made this? Kairoth nodded. He pointed to Jiho, then to himself, then crossed his claws over his chest. The meaning was clear. Friends. Always. Jiho felt his throat tighten with emotion. Always, he agreed. Above them, neither boy noticed Queen Velrissa watching from her tower. She saw the crystal bird, saw her son's proud expression, saw the human boy's genuine joy, and she made a decision. Whatever came next, whatever the nobles said, whatever the cost to tradition, she would not let anyone take this away from her son. Kairoth had found his voice. It just sounded different than anyone expected. The arrival of the human delegation ship caused quite a stir in the Draconian court. The vessel was small, compared to Draconian warships, barely the size of a cargo transport. It carried no visible weapons, yet it broadcast diplomatic codes and requested an audience with Queen Velrissa to negotiate for the return of captured humans. General Thoraxis found this hilarious. They come to bargain? With what? They have no military power. No resources we need. They are like mice asking a dragon to release their friends from the food stores. But Queen Velrissa granted the audience anyway. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was something else. Something that had been growing in her mind since watching her son laugh for the first time. Ambassador Sujin stepped off the human ship with confidence that surprised the Draconian guards. She was a woman in her mid-40s, dressed in formal diplomatic attire that looked simple compared to Draconian grandeur, but was neat and professional. Her dark hair was pulled back, and her eyes were sharp with intelligence. She did not bow as low as the Draconians expected. She met the Queen's gaze without fear, though not with disrespect either. Your Majesty, Sujin said in carefully practiced Draconian language. Thank you for granting this audience. I come to discuss the humans you currently hold, particularly those from the colony ship Meridian Hope. You come to bargain for slaves. General Thoraxis interrupted. This is a waste of the Queen's time. I come to discuss mutual benefit, Sujin corrected calmly. Slavery is inefficient. History proves this repeatedly. Willing cooperation produces better results than forced servitude. Several nobles shifted uncomfortably. Such talk bordered on insult. But Queen Velrissa raised a clawed hand for silence. Continue, she said. What could humans possibly offer that we cannot take? Sujin pulled out a small data device. Images projected into the air above it. Human adaptability. We have survived ice ages on our planet that should have killed us. We survived plagues that had 90% death rates. We survived our own tendency to war with ourselves. We did this through cooperation, innovation, and something your people might consider weakness, but which we consider strength. Emotional intelligence. The ability to understand, connect, and work together despite our differences. Pretty words, Thoraxis growled. But words do not win battles. No. Sujin agreed. But they prevent unnecessary battles. They build alliances. They create peace that lasts longer than any conquest. She looked directly at the Queen. Your people are warriors. Powerful warriors. But warriors who only know how to conquer eventually run out of worlds to conquer. Then what? The court fell silent. This human was either very brave or very foolish. Possibly both. Queen Velrissa stood from her throne. You speak boldly for someone whose people are at my mercy. But you interest me. I will grant you a tour of the palace. Let you see how your people are treated. Then we will discuss what mutual benefit might look like. As guards escorted Ambassador Sujin through the palace, she asked to see the human captives. The request was granted. They walked through the archives where Taemin worked, through the medical wing where Hae-won assisted, through the kitchens where many humans labored. Then they came to the gardens. Sujin stopped walking when she saw them. A small human boy and a young draconian prince, sitting together on the grass. The boy was folding something from paper, his hands moving quickly. The prince watched with complete attention, occasionally reaching out to help hold a corner. What is that? Sujin asked quietly. Prince Kairoth and his companion, one of the guards said, the distaste clear in his voice. The human boy. Ji-ho. The queen allows this. Sujin watched as Ji-ho finished folding the paper and held up a small bird shape. He threw it gently, and it glided through the air. Prince Kairoth's eyes followed its flight with wonder. He made a small sound, not quite a word, but clearly pleased. Then the prince took a piece of paper and tried to fold it himself. His claws made it difficult, but Ji-ho patiently showed him how to make careful creases. When Kairoth's paper bird was finished, it looked a bit crumpled, but he held it up proudly. Ji-ho grinned and clapped. Kairoth's mouth opened in what was clearly a smile. Then he made another sound. A laugh. Short and quiet, but unmistakable. Ambassador Sujin turned to look at Queen Velrissa, who had been walking with them. The queen's expression was unreadable, but her eyes were fixed on her son. Your son, Sujin said carefully. I was told he does not speak. He did not, Velrissa replied, until the human boy taught him to laugh. Now he communicates in other ways. Ways we never considered. May I speak with them? The queen nodded. They approached the two children. Ji-ho looked up and immediately stood, bowing respectfully. Prince Kairoth did the same, though his bow was less practiced. Hello, Sujin said in human language. Ji-ho, is it? I am Ambassador Sujin. I came to help bring humans home. Ji-ho's expression became complicated. Will Kairoth be okay if we leave? He needs friends. The other young draconians do not include him. Sujin glanced at the prince, who was watching her with careful attention. You care about him. He is my best friend, Ji-ho said simply. He is really smart. He just talks differently than other draconians. But different does not mean bad. Prince Kairoth reached out and tapped Ji-ho's arm. When the boy looked at him, the prince made a series of hand gestures. Ji-ho watched, then nodded. He says thank you for coming to help humans, Ji-ho translated. But he wants to know if humans and draconians can be friends, not just prisoners and captors. The question hung in the air. Ambassador Sujin looked at Queen Velrissa. That is exactly what I came to discuss. 8. That evening, while formal negotiations began in the throne room, something else was happening in the darker corridors of the palace. General Thoraxis met with a group of conservative nobles in a private chamber. The human ambassador speaks poison, Thoraxis said. She makes the queen doubt our ways. And look at what has happened to the prince. He plays with paper birds while other young royals learn combat. He makes small sounds like a hatchling, while he should be perfecting his roar. He creates art, while he should be commanding soldiers. Noble Saris nodded. My nephew is the same age as Prince Kairoth. He can already breathe a flame as long as my arm. He has memorized 12 battle strategies. He has the respect of his training group. Any of these things would make him more fit to rule than the current prince. The law allows challenges, another noble said quietly. If the court agrees that an heir is unfit, the trial of fire can be invoked. 3 tests. If he fails, the throne passes to another. We would be removing the queen's only son, someone objected. She will not forgive this. The queen's grief for her mate has made her soft, Thoraxis argued. She allows humans to influence royal policy. She permits her son to abandon tradition. If we truly love the empire, we must be willing to make hard choices. They talked long into the night, planning their move. Ji-ho knew nothing of this plot, but he felt something in the air changing. Draconian guards looked at him with more hostility than before. When he walked through the palace corridors, nobles turned away with expressions of disgust. Even some of the human servants warned him to stay away from the prince, but Ji-ho could not do that. He had discovered something important. Kairoth was different, yes, but he had gifts that others missed. The prince could not breathe fire, but he had created beautiful crystal sculptures. He could not roar, but he had taught himself to communicate through signs and gestures that were becoming more complex each day. He could not fight like other young Draconians, but he thought deeply about problems and found creative solutions. One afternoon, while they sat by the fountain, Ji-ho found Kairoth drawing in a notebook with a piece of charcoal. The prince had filled pages with sketches, buildings designed in ways Ji-ho had never seen. Star maps, marked with routes that avoided dangerous areas. Diagrams of machines that might solve problems. "You are brilliant," Ji-ho said quietly. "Why does no one else see this?" Kairoth looked at him and made a series of signs that Ji-ho had learned to read. "Because they only look for fire and roar. They do not look for this." "Then they are fools," Ji-ho declared. The prince smiled, but it was a sad smile. He signed again. "Maybe I am the fool. Maybe I should be what they want." "No," Ji-ho said firmly. "Being yourself is not foolish. They are wrong. Not you." Later that evening, Queen Velrisa summoned Ji-ho to her private chambers. This had never happened before. The boy walked through the crystal corridors with his heart pounding, uncertain if he was about to be punished or praised. The queen stood by a window, looking out at the 3 moons rising over Pyraxis Prime. She did not turn when Ji-ho entered. "Do you know why I allowed you to befriend my son?" she asked. Ji-ho swallowed nervously. "No, Your Majesty. Because I was watching him die slowly. Not physically, but inside. He was becoming empty. A shell. And I could do nothing to help him because I did not understand what he needed." She finally turned to face the boy. "Then you appeared. A small human child, who should have been terrified, who should have hated us for taking you from your home. Instead, you sat beside my son and taught him to skip stones. I just wanted to be his friend," Ji-ho said quietly. "Why? You owed us nothing. We took you prisoner." Ji-ho thought about his answer carefully. "Because he was lonely. I know what that feels like. And because being different is not the same as being less. My mother used to tell me that." Before the attack, something shifted in Queen Velrisa's expression. "Your mother? She died in the raid?" Ji-ho nodded, not trusting his voice. The queen was silent for a long moment. "I understand loss. I lost my mate. I have been losing my son in a different way. Your mother was wise. Being different is not being less." She paused. But many Draconians do not believe this. They will challenge Kairoth soon. They will try to prove he is unfit. And when that happens, both you and my son may be in great danger. Then we will face it together," Ji-ho said. Queen Velrisa looked at this small human boy standing before her with determination in his eyes, and she understood something new. Humans were not weak. They were strong in ways Draconians had never learned to measure. And maybe, just maybe, that strength was exactly what the Empire needed. The challenge came 3 days later, during a formal court gathering. General Thoraxis stood before the assembled nobles and announced his intention in a voice that echoed through the throne room like thunder. "I invoke the ancient right of trial by fire. Prince Kairoth must prove his worthiness to inherit the throne of Pyraxis Prime. Let him demonstrate the strength, voice, and power that all Draconian rulers must possess." A wave of shocked whispers swept through the court. Some nobles looked uncomfortable. Others nodded with approval. Queen Velrissa sat motionless on her throne, her golden eyes burning with barely controlled fury. "You dare challenge my son," she said, each word sharp as a blade. "I challenge in accordance with ancient law," Thoraxis replied. He was careful to bow respectfully. "A law even the queen cannot break, without breaking our entire society. The prince must face 3 trials: the flame of power, the roar of command, the combat of will. If he succeeds, none may question his right to rule. If he fails, the throne passes to one deemed more worthy." Velrissa's claws dug into the armrests of her throne, leaving deep scratches in the metal. But Thoraxis was right. The trial of fire was ancient law, created thousands of years ago to ensure that only the strongest ruled. She could not refuse without appearing to admit her son was too weak even to try. "When?" she asked coldly. 3 days. As tradition demands. Let all preparations be made. Thanks for watching. And in see user, we have on a video. And in forwetchen. Thanks for watching. The court erupted in debate. Nobles argued about the appropriateness of the challenge. Some called it cruel to test a prince so obviously unable to meet traditional standards. Others insisted that tradition must be upheld, that sentiment could not override the empire's needs. In the servants' quarters, Jiho heard the news from Taemin and felt his stomach drop. 3 trials, Taemin explained, his face grim. First, Kairoth must demonstrate fire. Second, he must command respect through his voice. Third, he must face a physical challenge, usually combat. He cannot do any of these things in the traditional way. Then we find new ways, Jiho said immediately. Kairoth is not helpless, he just does things differently. Haewon, who had been listening nearby, spoke up. "The boy is right. I have been studying the prince. His inability to produce flame or traditional roars is not weakness. His brain processes the world differently. He has strengths that traditional tests do not measure. What good are those strengths if the court only values fire and roar?" Another human asked bitterly. "Then we change what they value," Jiho said. "Or at least make them see that strength has more than one form." That night, Jiho was summoned to Queen Velrissa's chambers again. This time, Prince Kairoth was there too. The young dragon looked frightened, his silver scales seeming darker than usual. When he saw Jiho, though, he rushed forward and grabbed the boy's hand with his claws, careful not to hurt. "Jiho," the queen said, "my son cannot win this trial through traditional means. We both know this. General Thoraxis knows this. He calls the challenge specifically because he believes Kairoth will fail. But you have taught my son things I never considered. Ways of being strong that I did not recognize. Do you believe he can succeed?" Jiho looked at his friend. Kairoth's eyes were wide and scared, but there was also trust there. Trust in Jiho. Trust that somehow they would find a way. "Yes," Jiho said firmly. "But not by trying to be like other Draconians. By being himself. By showing that different does not mean less." "Explain," Jiho thought fast. "The first trial is fire, right? Kairoth cannot breathe fire. But fire is not just destruction. Fire is light. Fire is warmth. Fire is beauty. If we can show that, no one will accept alternative interpretations," Velrissa interrupted. "The trial is specific." "Then we use tools," said a voice from the doorway. Haewon entered, followed by Woojin, a human engineer who had been working in the palace maintenance shops. Humans do not have natural weapons like Draconians. So we create tools. We use our minds to overcome physical limitations. Woojin stepped forward. "I have access to materials in the workshops. If I knew what we needed." They talked through the night, planning. It was risky. It was unprecedented. But it was the only chance they had. The day of the trial arrived. The great arena of Pyraxis Prime had been opened for the first time in decades. Thousands of Draconians filled the seats. their scales creating a rainbow of colors in the sunlight. At the center of the arena stood a raised platform where the trials would take place. All the human captives had been brought to watch. They stood in a separate section, guarded but visible. Jiho searched the crowd until he found a small girl with features similar to his own, Yuna, his younger sister. He had only discovered a week ago that she was among the captives, working in the palace kitchens. Their eyes met across the distance, and she raised her hand in a small wave. Queen Velrissa sat on a throne placed at the arena's edge. Beside her stood Elder Paranthus, an ancient draconian so old his scales had turned nearly white. He would judge the trials. Prince Kairoth entered the arena. He looked small and fragile compared to his opponent, a young draconian named Draxus, nephew to General Thoraxis. Draxus was larger, his scales bright red like his uncle's, his movements confident. Behind him stood his uncle. Looking smug, Elder Pyranthus raised his voice, magically amplified to fill the arena. The trial of fire begins. First test. The flame of power. Let the challenged show his fire. Draxus stepped forward first. He inhaled deeply, his chest expanding. Then he exhaled a column of flame that shot upward like a pillar of pure fire, reaching high above the platform. The crowd roared approval. The heat could be felt even in the stands. When the flame ended, Draxus bowed, looking pleased with himself. Now the prince, Elder Pyranthus announced. Kairoth stepped forward. He could not breathe fire. Everyone knew this. The crowd fell silent, some with pity, others with satisfaction at seeing the inevitable failure. Then, something unexpected happened. Jiho ran from the stands, carrying something wrapped in cloth. Guards moved to stop him, but Queen Velrissa raised a hand. Let him pass. Jiho reached the platform and unwrapped the object. It was a crystal prism, carefully cut by Wujin over the past 3 days. He placed it in Kairoth's claws. The prince held the prism up to the sunlight. Immediately, the crystal split the light into thousands of rainbow rays that spread across the entire arena. The walls filled with colors. Reds and blues and greens and golds danced everywhere, creating a display more beautiful than any single flame. Jiho's voice rang out. Fire is not only destruction. Fire is light. Fire is warmth. Fire is beauty. Prince Kairoth creates fire that does not burn. He creates light that illuminates without destroying. The crowd murmured. Some scoffed. Others looked uncertain. Elder Pyranthus's ancient eyes narrowed thoughtfully. This is cheating, Thoraxis bellowed. He uses tools. This is not true fire. Humans have always used tools. Ambassador Sujin called out from the stands. She had been invited to watch. We use our minds to extend our abilities. Is that not also strength? One clued. Elder Pyranthus raised a hand for silence. The display is beautiful, but the law is clear. The trial requires fire. Jiho's heart sank. But he looked at Kairoth and saw that the prince was still holding the prism high, letting the rainbow light fill the arena. And something had changed in Kairoth's expression. He was not defeated. He was determined. The second trial began. The roar of command. Draxus stepped forward and released a battle cry that shook the platform. It was loud, powerful, commanding, the kind of roar that made soldiers follow into battle, that made enemies flee in terror. When silence returned, all eyes turned to Kairoth. The prince could not roar. His throat would not produce that sound. But he had prepared for this. Kairoth stepped forward and began to move. His hands created shapes in the air, gestures that Jiho had taught him, expanded and refined. He was signing. But more than that, his whole body became part of the communication. His posture, his movements, his facial expressions, all combined into a story told without words. At first, the draconian crowd did not understand. But as Kairoth continued, The meaning became clear. He was telling a story of a kingdom where strength came not from fear, but from understanding, where leaders listened before commanding, where different voices all contributed to a greater harmony. HFY stood and began to translate, her voice carrying Kairoth's silent message throughout the arena. Her words painted pictures of a future where the Draconian Empire grew stronger, not through conquest alone, but through alliance, where human innovation combined with draconian strength to create something neither species could achieve alone. Some draconians shifted uncomfortably. The message challenged everything they believed, but others listened with growing interest. They had seen their empire reach the limits of pure military expansion. They had felt the stagnation creeping in. Perhaps there was truth in this silent prince's message. General Thoraxis was furious. This is not a roar. This is not command. This is weakness, dressed as philosophy. But Elder Pyranthus did not immediately agree. The prince speaks of leadership, not through volume, but through vision. Is that not also a form of command? The trial was not over yet. The final trial began as the suns moved lower in the sky. The combat of will. This was the test that worried Jiho most because it involved actual fighting. Prince Kairoth had never trained in traditional combat. He was smaller than Draxus, with no flame to use as a weapon. The rules were explained by Elder Pyranthus. The two young Draconians would face each other in physical combat. Claws and tails were allowed. Wings could be used. The fight would continue until one surrendered or could no longer continue. Death was not required, but it was permitted. Queen Velrissa's claws dug into her throne so hard the metal bent. She could not intervene. She could only watch as her son faced a challenge that seemed impossible. Draxus stretched his wings and breathed a practice flame, showing off. The crowd cheered for him. He was everything a young draconian warrior should be. Strong, aggressive, confident. Kairoth stood quietly, looking small and uncertain. Then his eyes found Jiho in the crowd. The human boy made a quick series of gestures. Remember what we practiced. Use your mind. Be yourself. The combat began. Draxus charged immediately, claws extended, trying to overpower Kairoth with pure strength. But Kairoth did something unexpected. He moved aside at the last moment, using minimal effort. Draxus crashed into the empty space where Kairoth had been standing. The crowd murmured in surprise. Draxus roared in frustration and attacked again. Again, Kairoth dodged. He was not trying to overpower his opponent. He was studying him, learning his patterns. Fight me, Draxus bellowed. Stop running like a coward. But Kairoth was not running. He was doing exactly what Jiho had taught him about human combat strategy. Humans rarely won through brute strength. They won through intelligence, through understanding their opponent, through using efficiency over force. Draxus grew angrier with each missed attack. His movements became wilder, less controlled. He breathed flame, but Kairoth had already moved. He struck with his tail, but Kairoth anticipated it. The prince was not stronger, but he was smarter. Then Kairoth began to counterattack. Not with powerful strikes, but with precise ones. A tap to throw Draxus off balance. A push when the larger dragon was already moving forward, making him stumble. Kairoth used his opponent's own momentum against him, a concept foreign to traditional draconian fighting. The crowd grew quiet, watching something they had never seen before. This was not the glorious combat of flames and roars. This was something else, something that looked almost like a dance, where the smaller fighter stayed just ahead of the larger one, wearing him down through patience and precision. Taemin watched from the human section and whispered to HFY, "He is using martial arts principles. Control, balance, efficiency." Where did Jiho learn this? His father was in the military, HFY whispered back. He must have taught the boy, and the boy taught the prince. Look, Kairoth is winning. She was right. Draxus was panting now, exhausted from his aggressive attacks. His movements had become sloppy. Kairoth remained calm, controlled, still studying his opponent. Finally, Kairoth saw his opening. When Draxus launched another wild attack, the prince moved inside his guard, used his smaller size to his advantage, and with a complex maneuver that combined leverage and timing, flipped the larger dragon onto his back. Draxus hit the ground hard. Before he could rise, Kairoth's claws were at his throat. One quick strike could end it. The crowd held its breath, but Kairoth did not strike. Instead, he stepped back and offered his claw to help Draxus stand. The gesture shocked everyone. In draconian combat, you dominated your opponent. You did not show mercy. You certainly did not help them up. Draxus stared at the offered claw with confusion, then growing anger. You mock me. Kairoth shook his head. He made a series of signs. Jiho called out the translation. He says you fought with honor. He respects your strength. But true power is knowing when to fight and when to show mercy. I do not want your mercy, Draxus spat. Then take his respect. Haewon called out. Because he just defeated you while showing more maturity than most adult draconians in this arena. The truth of her words rippled through the crowd. Kairoth had won, not through overwhelming force, not through fear, but through skill, intelligence, and a kind of compassion that draconians rarely displayed. Elder Paranthus rose from his seat. The ancient draconian moved slowly to the center of the platform. All eyes turned to him. I have lived many centuries, he said, his voice cracking with age but still powerful. I have seen hundreds of trials. I have seen displays of flame that could melt stone, roars that could shatter crystal, combat that painted the arena with blood. He paused, looking at Prince Kairoth. Never have I seen what I witnessed today. General Thoraxus stood. The prince failed all 3 trials by traditional measure. He used tricks instead of fire, gestures instead of voice, strange fighting instead of honorable combat. Silence, Elder Paranthus commanded. Thoraxus actually obeyed, though fury burned in his eyes. The prince did not fail. He revealed something we have been too blind to see. That strength has many forms. That power can illuminate instead of only destroy. That leadership can inspire instead of only command through fear. That victory can show mercy instead of only domination. The elder turned to address the entire crowd. The law demands that the prince show fire, voice, and strength. He has done so. Just not in the way we expected. And perhaps that is exactly what this empire needs. Not another ruler who does things the same old way, but one who can see new paths forward. D4Peen. This is madness, Thoraxus shouted. You would throw away thousands of years of tradition for the tricks of humans? I would recognize wisdom wherever it appears, Paranthus replied. Even if it comes from a species we dismissed as weak. Queen Velrissa stood from her throne. Her voice carried across the arena like rolling thunder. General Thoraxus, you invoked the trial of fire to prove my son unworthy. Instead, you have proven that our empire's definition of worthy is too narrow. The humans have shown us something valuable, not through conquest, not through force, but through friendship, through teaching, through seeing the potential we overlooked. She walked to the center of the platform and placed her claw on Kairoth's shoulder. My son will be heir. He will rule differently than his ancestors, and under his leadership, this empire will grow in ways we never imagined. I will not accept this, Thoraxus growled. He looked around at the other nobles. Who stands with tradition? Who stands with me? Several nobles rose. Not a majority, but enough. The arena fell into tense silence. This was how civil wars began. Then Ambassador Sujin stood. Before you tear your empire apart, consider this. I came here to negotiate for my people's freedom. I came expecting to beg, and plead. Instead, I have seen something remarkable. A young prince who learned from humans. A queen who was willing to question tradition. An elder who was wise enough to recognize new forms of strength. She walked down to the arena floor, her small human form seeming almost comical among the giant draconians. But her voice was strong. General Thoraxis, you are right that humans are weaker than draconians in physical strength. We cannot breathe fire. We have no natural weapons. We have been your captives. But we are still here. We survived the capture. We adapted to your world. We even made friends with your prince. That is human strength. Adaptability. Resilience. The ability to find solutions where others see only problems. She turned to address the full arena. I propose an alliance. Not humans as slaves. Not draconians as conquerors. But genuine partnership. Combine draconian strength with human innovation. Draconian power with human creativity. Imagine what we could build together. Why should we share power with a weaker species? A noble called out. Because we are not weaker, Jiho shouted suddenly. The small boy's voice surprised everyone. We are different. And different is not less. Kairoth taught me that. I taught him that. Together we taught everyone here that. If you cannot see that, then you are not strong. You are just scared. Number. General Thoraxis turned his fury on the human boy. You dare speak to us this way? You are a slave. A child. Nothing. No. Queen Velrissa said quietly, but her voice cut through the arena like a blade. He is a friend to my son. He is a teacher who helped my child find his voice. He is braver than most of the warriors in this arena. And if you threaten him, Thoraxis, you threaten me. The general faced the queen. And for a moment, it seemed violence would erupt. Then, something unexpected happened. Prince Kairoth stepped between them. The small dragon looked up at the massive general and made a series of signs. Jiho translated, his voice shaking but clear. Kairoth says, if you want to challenge someone, challenge him. He already beat your nephew. He will beat you too if he must. Not because he is stronger, but because his cause is right. The arena held its breath. Then, slowly, General Thoraxis lowered his head, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. You have courage, young prince. Perhaps there is strength in you after all. Just not the kind I understand. He looked at Queen Velrissa. I do not accept this new path. But I will not start a war over it. I will watch. And if this path leads to disaster, I will say I warned you. It was not complete victory, but it was enough. The tension broke. The trial was over. Prince Kairoth had won. 5 years later, the Draconian Empire had transformed into something new. The Alliance of Draconis, as it was now called, stretched across even more systems than before. But this expansion came not through conquest but through willing cooperation. Other species, seeing the partnership between Draconians and humans, asked to join. Prince Kairoth, now nearly 13 in human years, served as ambassador to new species, a position created specifically for him. He traveled with human advisors and Draconian guards, meeting other civilizations and finding peaceful ways to connect. His inability to roar had become famous. His signing language had been adopted throughout the Alliance as a common form of communication, allowing different species to interact more easily. Jiho, now 17, served as the prince's chief advisor and closest friend. His sister Yuna worked in the Alliance's education department, developing programs to teach young beings of all species to communicate across differences. The gardens of Pyraxis Prime had changed too. They were no longer just for Draconians. Human children played there alongside young dragons. Other species had begun to visit and add their own plants to the collection. The fountain where Jiho first taught Kairoth to skip stones had become a memorial, a reminder that friendship could change everything. Queen Velrissa stood at her window, watching the gardens as she had years ago. But now, instead of sadness, she felt hope. Below, Kairoth was surrounded by a group of mixed-species younglings. He was teaching them something, his hands moving in graceful signs, his expression patient and kind. A laugh rang out, then another. Soon, all the children were laughing together. Different species, different voices, but one sound of joy. HFY appeared beside the Queen, now serving as the Alliance's chief scientist. Your Majesty, the Council is ready for the vote on expanding the treaty to include the Kalarian system. Good, Velrissa replied. But give me one more moment. She watched her son below, watched him laugh, watched him teach, watched him lead not through fire and roar, but through compassion and understanding. A small human boy had once sat beside her silent son and taught him to skip stones. That simple act of kindness had grown into something that changed an entire civilization. The Draconian Empire had been powerful, but the Alliance of Draconis was becoming something greater, something that honored strength in all its forms. Queen Velrissa smiled, a gesture that had become more common in recent years. Everything had changed, and it had all started with a laugh. The Queen turned from the window and headed to the council chamber. There was much work to do, but now, for the first time in centuries, the work felt like building rather than conquering, like creating rather than destroying, like hope rather than fear. And in the garden below, Prince Kairoth taught another child to laugh, passing on the gift that Jiho had given him. The sound echoed through the palace, bright and pure and full of promise for the future.